Property Tribes on location at the Property Investor Show at Excel Spring Edition, and I was walking through the stands and I saw my next guest and I thought, I recognise that gentleman. It's Rowan, who you may have seen on Sky TV and also YouTube, and also chairman of the Elite Investor Club. And Graham, it's lovely to meet you in person, having seen your videos and heard your commentary. You wear a lot of different hats in the investment sector, don't you?
I sort of do, yes. I chair Elite Investor Club. I do a lot of speaking. I do a lot of TV stuff on Sky mainly. And also I've written a few books now, and I even chair a company that's a new player in the cemetery sector, which I might tell you about in a moment. Well,
we'll be interested to hear about that. It's very interesting to hear your view on buy-to-let, because you look across all the different investment sectors. The Elite Investor Club's very much about diversifying to mitigate risk. What's your view on buy-to-let in 2019?
Well, one of the questions I always ask myself with any investment is, would I put new money into it today? And I think for about maybe 30 years now, buy-to-let's been the sort of default investment for Brits. And a lot of people still come to shows like this thinking property's a one-way street. I can't lose money if I go into property. And to be frank, a lot of people here kind of still peddle that view. My view is there have been a lot of headwinds that have been really pushing back against buy-to-let in recent years, and it's been a complete shock to me that a supposedly conservative government has really mounted what I can only call a vendetta against private landlords in the last 5 years. The biggest one obviously is Section 24. People here, I think, are only just starting to understand the full implications of that. Now, I know tens of thousands of landlords are exiting the sector because of that. And apparently in some parts of the country, we're even seeing a measurable increase in homelessness because the tenants have got nowhere else to go. So well done, George Osborne. You've really added to the housing crisis in this country. So when you see headwinds like that, it's clear that you can't just assume that the default buy-to-let investment is still the place to be putting new money in 2019.
No, I totally agree with you. Do you invest in property yourself?
I do, although I've completely sold out my residential buy-to-let portfolio for a number of reasons. Obviously Section 24 was a part of that. Also, I'm a believer in investments that give you passive income. And I always get amused when I speak to a buy-to-let landlord, like say somebody with an HMO, and they say, oh yes, I've got passive investments, I run an HMO. And how many hours a week do you spend? Oh, about 25 hours a week. Oh, you call that passive? So I like things that put money in my bank account without me having to show up and either mend the plumbing or find a new tenant at short notice. So yes, I invest in commercial properties, things like care homes, things like hotels and so on, where I can lease it back to a developer or an operator who does all the operational work and just puts money in my bank account. I have given up on residential buy-to-let, so I walk my own talk. I've been saying it for years. I've been slaughtered on social media for it by the trolls, but eventually what I've been saying for 3 years I think is starting to come home to people, that it's not necessarily the best place to be putting new money in 2019.
Very, very interesting to hear your view there, and it's also interesting to hear you talk about quite big scale projects like care homes and dementia homes and cemeteries and things like that. I think for the average landlord, perhaps I could be one of those, it sounds interesting, but it sounds very daunting. Buy-to-let to me feels very familiar, comfortable, I understand it. How is the best way for landlords that want to elevate their game to the kind of things you're doing? How do they grow to that?
Well, firstly, I would say that what I always look for is mega trends that I can invest into. And the biggest trend in this country at the moment is the aging population. I'm a proud member of the baby boomer generation. The oldest boomers are now 73, and we're going to have 2,000 people turning 70 every day for the next 15 years in this country. So there's nothing like enough retirement apartments to downsize to. There are nothing like enough dementia care homes. We already have nearly 1 million people living with dementia before the baby boomers get to the age where that becomes an issue. And yes, there's actually not enough cemetery space either. So a lot of my portfolio now is geared towards that mega trend. It doesn't necessarily have to mean a very capital intensive investment. You can buy individual suites in hotels and care homes for 60, 70, 80,000. Now, okay, they're not mortgageable, but that's probably about the deposit you'd use on a typical buy-to-let. And then you're going to get an 8, 9, 10% net yield, and it's completely passive. The money just arrives in your bank account. You've got the security of the bricks and mortar, you've got a long-term lease registered at the land registry, and then you lease it back to the operator for anything from 10 to 25 years. So they do all the work, they assume all your responsibilities as landlord, and it's completely passive income, which I've yet to see a buy-to-let model that lives up to that.
No, you're absolutely right. What I'm kind of taking away from that, if we look at it, what small landlords could take away from that is to be very niche. For instance, landlords could create properties that work for disabled people or to people with disabilities. Actually looking, as you say, at trends and niches. That's a very good way to build a solid portfolio, whether you're just doing standard buy-to-let or indeed looking at the bigger stuff that you deal with.
Well, I mean, one example of that, I think, would be furnished holiday lets. They're one of the...
Big fan of them.
Yeah, that's one of the few remaining things, because they're automatically regarded by HMRC as a business. So there's no Section 24. You've got capital allowances you can offset against the initial profits and so on. So one of the things we're promoting at the moment are holiday lodges, which are mortgageable, but also treated as furnished holiday lets. So you get the benefit of all the offset of the capital allowances. You get your profit, your full amount of your finance cost can be offset, no Section 24, and you get some personal use. So things like that I think are a great little niche. Some people I know are making good money out of HMOs still, but again, they've just changed all the licensing rules. So it feels to me like if you become a private landlord in 2019 Britain, you paint a great big target on your chest that says, Philip Hammond, come and get me. And I'm getting a bit fed up with that. The trouble is, obviously, if we go the other way, we get a Corbyn government, they're talking about rent controls, they're talking about capital controls, they're talking about unlimited fines for whatever they decide as a rogue landlord. So, these are pretty scary times to be in the property sector.
Well, they are, and it's probably one of the things that you can't mitigate in property is against government intervention and changing government policy and a changing government. And I totally agree with you. It does create a great deal of uncertainty for investors. And I think what I understand about the Elite Investor Club is that many landlords that have built your standard, single occupancy buy-to-let portfolio or HMO portfolios, once they've got that under their belt, they look to diversify, and that's when they kind of find their way to you.
Absolutely. So part of that diversification is into things like the commercial property I've talked about, but increasingly I'm trying to open up people's thinking to what I call meta diversification, which is to say, start raising your eyes above the sort of local level and think about becoming a global citizen, so that you have assets in multiple countries, you have perhaps business in multiple countries, income. I've just bought a property in Montenegro, for example, because you get residency there just by owning a property. And if it does become necessary to move there, if Mr. Corbyn gets into Downing Street, it's a 9% tax regime. So, I'm in the Adriatic, lovely sort of climate like the south of France. I'm paying 9% tax, all just because I bought a property there. So I'm trying to encourage people to really have assets around the world. So you can own gold in different countries, you can have multi-currency accounts, so you can play one currency against another. So I think the next level of sophistication as an investor is to just go beyond the UK and take a more global outlook on how you can benefit now and longer term in the future by having assets in multiple countries.
Well, I have to say I've really enjoyed talking to you, and you have actually opened my eyes to other possibilities. So it's been really, really great to have you on Property Tribes TV. Thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
And I'm sure everybody watching this has really enjoyed hearing these insights. So stay tuned, we've got more to come on Property Tribes, and if you are watching on YouTube, please click across to propertytribes.com. Thank you.